Awesome. Are we live?
I think we're live.
Awesome. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, everyone. It's great to be here with everybody. Today we'll be talking about greener design. Love, just blow up the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from. Say hello. And yeah, let's get started. So yeah, I feel like a good place to start is always with introductions. My name is Shane Tierney. My pronouns are he, him. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada. I'm a senior design producer with Microsoft. With regards to the topic that we're talking about today, greener design, just to speak a little bit to my own climate journey. So I'm originally from the west coast of Ireland in a very rural area called Mam Valley. So I've always been aware of how beautiful nature is and just how important the environment is. But it's only been in the last few years that I've really started to think about my role with the climate emergency and how I can create impact, which is how I sort of met Sandra, who was part of the initial green design V team at Microsoft. So I reached out to her, and yeah, that's sort of why I'm here today, to talk to all of you, find people about greener design. Sandra, do you want to give an intro?
Yeah, so my name is Sandra, pronouns she, her. I'm also working at Microsoft, and this is where I met Shane through the Green Design V team. And I've been, exploring the space of digital sustainability and design for a few years now, partially at Microsoft, but also at a community called ClimateAction.tech. And yeah, here we are.
Here we are. Awesome. So to get into it, or before we get into it, I would love to ask all of you just to get a pen and paper. We're not going to tell you exactly what you'll be doing, but we'll just let you know that you might be drawing, doodling, or writing. So just before we get into everything, yeah, just have a look around you and see if you can grab some pen and paper. So what is the impact of design? This is what we're going to talk about a little bit more. And also, do our choices matter? And in short, yes, they do. When we think about product design in general, physical product design, it's a bit more tangible when we see like the waste. So we can look at different areas like material sourcing to make sure that we are ethically sourcing materials, look at manufacturing improvements, designing for disassembly and repair, and also when we're thinking about the design process, making sure that our waste is reused or recycled. However, with digital product design, which a lot of us will be are probably working in for folks on the call, it's useful to think about it from two perspectives. So there's the creation process, which is us logging into Figma, starting up our laptop, and everything that's needed to create the designs, but also how the end user ends up using the designs. So sort of end to end. And one thing just to call out, it's what's needed for both is devices, infrastructure, and electricity. Even taking, like, none of that just exists. And also taking electricity as an example, like it doesn't feel very tangible. Like you don't see it, you don't smell it. But when you do click on something, or when you do plug in your laptop, greenhouse gases are emitted, and something not so clean and sort of smelly goes up into the atmosphere. So those would be the two differences between physical and digital product design. Here's a bit of a scary statistic just to sort of ground us all in the situation. In 2017, only 17.3% of all the energy used came from renewables, which is sort of terrifying. And you might be thinking, like, is this a big deal in the grand scheme of things? But things do add up. And we're going to do a bit of a pop quiz here for folks on the call. If the internet were a country, it will be the world's blank largest polluter. So I think Susan, who's on the call helping us, is going to publish the poll right now. And we'd love to get everyone here to vote, just to get a sense of what people are thinking. Also, if I was to give a hint, pre-pandemic, the tech industry's carbon footprint was similar to the airline industry. And obviously with the pandemic, there's been a rise in remote working. So it's, yeah, bear that in mind. I'm just going to check the chat. So I feel like a lot of you have probably seen now that and if I was to close the poll and move on to the next slide, it is the world's 7th largest polluter. So I feel like taking a second to sort of let that sink in. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But with that can feel scary, and it can feel like, what do we even do to like combat that, and how do we make an impact? And what we're going to go through now is a bit of a backpack with some tools and how you can get started on your journey to digital sustainability. So let's talk about your torch. This is your first tool. So the climate crisis doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not solely an environmental issue. So there's a whole bunch of ethical, political, and systemic issues. And a lot of these issues overlap with tech, design, and how we just do business and how society works. Society nowadays is it's rooted in exploitation and extraction. And again, this is scary, but once you understand these intricacies and you can shine a light on how they all relate, this is where you're able to start changing mindsets and working practices. Next tool in your trusted backpack is a megaphone. So big change starts small. It takes only 3.5% of the wider population actively participating in nonviolent protests to ensure meaningful, impactful, serious political change. And what this looks like is forming groups, making connections, and in your work, in your communities, in your family. Like, it's having those conversations and doing it at a small scale, and then gaining the confidence to bring it into those larger conversations, say at work, when you're advocating for some of these design changes that move more towards climate impact and more lasting impact. An example that's really top of mind for me is at Microsoft this week, it's Hackathon Week, which is an event across Microsoft globally where folks essentially get a week to focus on something that they care about. So they can fix something, they can hack something, they can learn about something. But even this week, we've been running a green design cohort where we get to work on different projects, such as like, how do we create a more sustainable culture? How do we create a scorecard to ascertain like what our experiences are like? And it really is an example of how this big change starts small. All it takes is a small group of people who really care about this to make a change, and yeah, it compounds. Next tool is your brush. So I'm sure we're all aware that talking about climate can be hard. People are at different points of their own journey of understanding the climate crisis. It's super nuanced, it's really complex. And one thing just to really ground ourselves in is it's really important to listen to one another, share what we know, and then paint a picture. And also thinking about their values as well, because that's how you're going to empathize with someone who's at a different point of their journey, is find some shared values and then paint that picture of what a future and a great future would look like when it comes to climate. An example, just to use another one for Sandra and I, is Sandra set up a co-working session that we have every Friday morning for our team on the Green Design V team to come together and just share our learnings and talk about open questions that we have, how things are going. And I think it's important to it's just really impactful, like having that community and being able to talk about climate, especially when it's quite a scary topic, and it can cause a lot of climate anxiety. And the last tool I'm going to talk about in our backpack is a compass. So digital is physical. As I mentioned earlier, digital services, they require a lot of physical infrastructure and electricity. And a lot of this electricity, in 2017, it was less than 20%, it's coming from burning fossil fuels. So with this compass, again, coming back to the tool, following that path of your design, from the user pressing the button through to the cables and the wires to the data center and all the way back. It's important to be aware of that. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sandra, and she's going to talk a little bit more about our principles.
Yeah, so in your backpack now you've got your tools, and you're ready to dive into the design principles. So we split the principles into two categories: think bigger before you start and build better by default. And think bigger before you start offers fundamental questions to ask yourself and your team when you're starting a new project or when you're reevaluating your project. In this, you'll need your torch and your megaphone and your brush. So we'll kind of dive in. Challenging the status quo is the first thing to do. We know that the current system isn't working. It benefits few and destroys the livelihoods of many. So the first step is to challenge the status quo. If we balance user needs with finite resources and we don't extract more than we need to satisfy a user need, then we're in a better place than otherwise. So how does this kind of translate into actions, and what could this look like in your job? It's mainly about asking questions. So why are we working with clients that don't align with our vision of the future? Or interrogating the real project purpose as well. Like, why are we doing this? And keep on asking those questions until you get to the core motivation. You can also dig deeper into the impact of the project. So thinking about short-term, medium-term, and long-term, like who is harmed, who is helped. Are we encouraging consumption, or are we encouraging conservation? You could question the metrics for success. So are more clicks really going to give us more insights as to how useful this is? A broader question could be why do we need to grow our user base? This is a very controversial one in the kind of world that we live in, but worth asking. And a side note here, if you are curious about alternative economic models that don't rely on infinite growth, I can highly recommend the book Less is More by Jason Hickel. In the book, he writes about the beginnings of capitalism and the changes that we need to make to get to a post-capitalist economy. So he talks about capping resource use, shortening the working week, reducing inequality, expanding public goods like healthcare, schools, and affordable housing, and ending planned obsolescence. And that's the process of creating things that break down earlier so that a user is forced to buy more. And especially this last one connects back to digital design, because often devices are not replaced because the hardware is broken, but because the software is not functioning anymore on the hardware. So making your design work for all the devices can be really beneficial in the long term. Back to the principles. The second one in the think bigger category is put care first. So this is kind of after challenging the status quo, what should you do instead? So we took inspiration from the society-centered design principles on this one. And again, like this, turning this into actions, you can look at it from a justice point of view and look at power dynamics within your team or within the wider company. So who has the power in decision making and who is left out? Whose needs are seen or whose needs are ignored? And what is the power dynamic between your team and your end users as well? And you can use your torch here to shine a light on the impacts that your project might have on humans and non-humans. And then on the health side, we found the Spotify ethics assessment really, really helpful, actually. Microsoft has put out tools on that as well. But the Spotify one really kind of, yeah, I personally just love it. And it looks across physical, emotional, and societal harms that your product might cause. So one of the things that we could think about here in terms of digital is the fact that we are designing very much for an attention economy. So trying to grab the user's attention at all times. So the question here is, what if we change that? Cutting the noise and designing calmer experiences that are less addictive. So those are the first two kind of principles in the think bigger category. And those are big ones and they feel a little bit daunting sometimes, which is why it is super, super helpful to use your paintbrush as well and paint that picture and try and see yourself getting there, because that just makes it more tangible as well. And while we work on this bigger mindset shift, there's also more immediate actions that we can do in our day-to-day design work. And this brings me to the build better by default. So this is the stuff that you can consider in your design thinking, in your UX, and in your UI work. And we've split it into 3 subcategories, if you will. First, we can ensure that our work is optimized for low energy and consumption. So that means or translates into actions through simplifying our user journeys, avoiding endless scrolling and auto-loading content, removing visuals that we don't need, and reducing file sizes as well. So all about kind of storing less data in general, having fewer data transfers. And again, kind of going back to what I said before around devices being replaced because the software is not working. A lot of that is because we just keep on adding new features and bloating a lot of the software, which then doesn't work on all the hardware anymore. So yeah, this optimizing step can be a great kind of remedy to that as well. And one example that we wanted to put in here to kind of make this a little bit more tangible is a low impact website called Organic Basics. This brand kind of tried to go for vector graphics rather than photos of models wearing their clothes. So the kind of point we're trying to make here is that you don't necessarily need to sacrifice the experience and not have any visuals at all, but you can take this efficiency and this optimization part into consideration. Then secondly, we can be much more transparent. So this is about raising awareness and allowing for customization. So the raising awareness part is about raising awareness on the impact of digital products and services. So visualizing those wasted resources and then giving the user control. And this is where the customization part comes in as well. So could you provide an option to switch to a different energy consumption mode? Or could a user turn off all auto-generated content? Or could you reduce this streaming content and download it when there's an abundance of renewable energy, for example? Do users have a way of giving feedback so that you can respond to it and remove content that's outdated? And then lastly, in this section, we've got adaptable. And this kind of also relates back to some of the things that I just mentioned. So if our services are aware of their context and the available resources, then they can adapt accordingly. So if you think about a video chat app, it might offer the option to change to audio only when there's not a lot of renewable energy, but switch back to video calls when there's a lot of renewable energy in the grid. And the one very tangible example on this as well that is a little bit more related to the actual climate disasters that people are already living through is if you are in a crisis situation and you don't have access to power and you need to access news in order to know what to do next, basically. How can we reduce the, basically make news websites less power draining, through, for example, through removing ads, removing the imagery, or making it an opt-in process where people switch to a low energy mode. And that kind of is all of the design principles in a nutshell here. The bigger point that we wanted to make with this presentation, I guess, is that there's room for us to change things, and we can make small changes in our design practice that have ripple effects and impacts. And we can use the tools in our backpack to learn and question things and band together as a community as well. And yeah, it's time to change our mindsets and how we view our work and our role in the world. So let's build only what we need, better by default, so optimized, transparent, and adaptable. And let's use our craft and our imagination and our influence to challenge the status quo and design a different future where we can put care first. Back to you, Shane.
That was beautiful, Sandra. So just on that closing note, we're going to get you to get that pen and paper that I asked you to get earlier in the call. And we want you to think about what are you going to do with your backpack and the tools in your backpack, and what are your goals to make that difference and envision that future that we all want. And share it with the world, put it on social media, and be sure to use the BeMore 2022 hashtag. And absolutely, if I know there's a bunch of questions that we'll get to now, but feel free to reach out to me or Sandra as well if anyone else has any questions after this too. But yeah, thank you all for your time.
All right, we've got lots of questions.
Lots of questions.
Ren asked, what are some more resources for learning more about greener design? I did already post an answer to that one, just basically linking to one ClimateAction.tech resource that we put together, which basically, yeah, links you out to so much more stuff to learn more. It's like, yeah, a gold mine to kind of look at that page. Then Bianca, hey Bianca, she's definitely also part of ClimateAction.tech, so good to see you here. How did you choose to work on climate in a big corporation as opposed to a climate-focused company or non-profit? And how do you feel that your impact compares? Shane, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I can give my own personal answer
Yeah.
because it's a great question and it's something I think a lot about. I think impact, you can have impact in lots of different ways, and you can have impact from within this larger corporation, or you can have impact from like a smaller, let's say, nonprofit that's more focused on climate work. And I think it's important to think about your own skill sets and your own values and passions, and how you can create impact in whatever that looks like. So for me, I enjoy facilitating creative conversations around climate, and doing it in a large company and advocating for greener design. And that's how I feel I can create a lot of impact. So it's very personal, but yeah, it's just a choice that you make. Sandra, would you agree? I'm curious actually what your answer to this will be.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because, and this also relates back to a conversation I recently had with a bunch of ClimateAction.tech members, where we talked about behavior change, design, and whether hope or fear kind of drives more behavior change. And one of the things that kind of I reflected on in that conversation was that I think a lot of us kind of go through these stages with climate and design where we're like, awareness of like, wow, this is a thing. Oh my God, I didn't know. Then there's this question of, oh my God, what is the most impactful thing I can do right now? And that sometimes leads to kind of getting lost a little bit, because we kind of start thinking, okay, if I join a climate startup right now, then I can do this in like a year or so, and then blah 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 blah. But ultimately, it's about starting where you're at, because that will give you the most immediate sense of hope and being able to do something. But it will also kind of set you up for success if you do want to move into a climate-focused company role later. So for myself, I just started doing this at Microsoft. I was at Microsoft for like a year, and then delved into all of that climate work. I still sometimes think about switching to a climate-focused career, or in a climate company, I guess. But ultimately, I do believe that every job needs to be a climate job, and no matter which company you're in, you should be thinking about this kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree there.
Then we've got from Vivian, what is the biggest energy leak from a design outcome? This is an interesting one, because measuring energy efficiency is still such a new concept in tech. So you can definitely have proxies for like how much carbon, for example, a website emits. But it's all like the maths behind it is still relatively, in its infancy. So you can't 100% rely on it. In general, though, the bigger the data, or the file size even, the bigger the energy output required to move it from A to B, or to get it, to play a video, for example. Like auto-playing videos, or playing videos in general, is probably a pretty high energy output compared to text, like plain text. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers it. I don't know, Shane, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was a good answer. Yeah, there's no like one answer to that question, but I think you made a really good point. Looking at the next one was just about the resources. So there was, I think, Sandra, you answered that.
Well, this
Later.
one is specifically about our slides, and I think we'll probably be able to share those as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
So we can send those after for folks who are interested.
Yeah.
The next one from Rachel. Do you think that the cause of the digital world being such a large polluter is lack of education? Since it's not a physical sense of garbage, it's harder to realize the amount of electricity needed to sustain the internet and electrical technology. I think lack of education is definitely a big piece of this. I feel like folks feel paralyzed because they aren't aware of the small changes that they can take on a day-to-day basis as designers to make that change. I think it is a perception shift. And again, because it's not a garbage bag that you can physically see and smell, it is, yes, it just requires a different way of thinking. But I think it's education that is, I think with climate work, it's important not to come across as like fear mongering or leaning into the doom part. I think we also need to educate people, but lean into the hope part and give people really actionable like tools and insights, and like this is how you can make a difference in a very easy way. What do you think, Sandra?
Yeah, I definitely agree on the education and piece as well. And the Green Software Foundation is actually thinking about this as well, because in software engineering, software engineers tend to be taught like a little bit about optimization, but not for the reason of climate. So there's also like some connections that we can make with existing educational like programs and just education. But in the digital design space, there's definitely a lack of that. There's even like a lack of understanding where our devices come from to begin with. And I posted this recently in as part of one of the hackathon groups. I'll put it in the chat. One of my co-organizers at ClimateAction.tech created this really cool and great Google Earth material tour. So you kind of go to different mines on Google Earth to see where the raw materials for your devices come from. And it makes it super tangible to kind of understand, okay, this battery actually was created by putting all of these raw earth materials together. So I think there's so many different layers of education that are still needed. But I also totally agree with what you said there, Shane, on like making sure that it is something that doesn't just put you down, but can help lift you up as well in terms of actions to take and projects that are already going on that are impactful.
Totally, because there's so much going on.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes we're not aware of all the great work that's going on. So it's good to seek that out.
Yeah.
The next question, from Marshall, which causes more pollution, the internet or blockchain? That's a big question. I'm not entirely sure. I don't have any like tangible metrics to say one or the other. They both have a lot of factors associated with each of them that do have a negative climate impact. Sandra, if you were to wager a response to either or, what would you sort of say?
I think I would be cheeky and ask a question back. What is more useful, the internet or blockchain? Because ultimately, if we think about what is actually like a useful bit of technology versus what is something that is just there to do random things but doesn't really have an application that is useful, then even if it is very efficient, it's still not needed in that case. And from everything that I've read so far about blockchain, at least, there's no real application for it that kind of makes it worth kind of polluting anything at all. So that's where I'm at. But my understanding is also relatively limited. But I saw this great video that kind of laid out what blockchain is for and what it isn't for, and how it
I feel
to
like
find
that's a whole other presentation talking
Yeah.
about what's needed, not needed. We could
Yeah.
probably rant about NFTs for a while, but I don't think this is a space to do that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Rana has a question. How can we measure our individual impact of our own usage and the pollution it causes? Again, I think there's many different ways to think about our own individual impacts. There's in your personal life where you can stop eating meat or eat less meat. You can really cut down on the amount of air travel you're doing. You can buy more sustainably. So there's so many different things that you can do that you can like have as an own sort of metric of your individual impact and the carbon, I guess, you're creating. But from a work perspective, it's thinking through all the things that we discussed around thinking bigger and building better. Sandra, what do you think in terms of like how to measure it? Like, is there a tangible way to measure impact?
Yeah, so I think at work, it's probably best to collaborate with your engineering partners, because they will have the most up-to-date information on how much energy is actually being used. And if they don't have that information yet, then this is a perfect kind of place to then ask, why don't we have that information yet, and can we get that information? On a personal level, like there's a bunch of like pollution or carbon footprint tracker apps out there already that kind of look at this kind of stuff. But at work as well, this is a slight tangent, but when it comes to thinking about your individual impact, but through the lens of work, or related to work, I guess, one of the things to think about as well is your pension funds. So a lot of pension funds actually are based on fossil fuel companies or include fossil fuel companies. So there's some incentive there as well for you to potentially go and see if you can change that for yourself, and then also see if you can change that as like the default pension funds that people get enrolled in when they join the company. Because ultimately, putting our money where our mouth is kind of related to our pensions as well in that kind of aspect. But that was a slight tangent. There was one question that I think we almost missed. So how can we as design early career contribute to making sustainable design, from Rohit? Especially when you're early in career, it can feel super daunting to speak up, I think. So if you do feel like you're not comfortable speaking up about climate, it is helpful to seek out communities outside of work to begin with. So one of the things that we're trying to do at ClimateAction.tech as well is kind of give you that space outside of work to start having those conversations, so that you can build the confidence to then ask a question in an all-hands meeting, or ask a question in a resourcing discussion. But yeah, so I guess, yeah, building up to that confidence so that you can start asking those questions, I think is a good starting point. I don't know, Shane, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I totally agree. And I think there's community that, like, sometimes it might not be as simple to find communities in the climate space, like based on like where you are. And I would sort of challenge folks, like, if there isn't a community or you can't find one, like, why not start a community? A community can be made up of a very small group of people.
Yeah.
I think having that drive and passion to start the conversation that'll ignite like a fire of spin-off effect of people getting excited and engaged about climate and what they can do.
You can start those conversations outside of the design discipline as well. So one of the things that I actually did when I started looking at just sustainability at Microsoft is I started meeting every Friday at 11 a.m. for 11 minutes with local people in my building to talk about climate and support the student climate strikers. So yeah, even looking outside of your own discipline, you will that kind of community internally will give you a good kind of grounding, I guess, in pushing for more action in various ways afterwards.
And also, slightly tangential to that is, I feel like one skill is being able to talk to someone who doesn't hold the same beliefs as you do. And I think putting yourself in those situations to have those conversations where, you have to meet someone where they're at, and intentionally seeking out those conversations. I think that's really useful, even as a designer, when it comes to advocating for more sustainable design decisions. Because you get that experience, and even just as a person outside of work, like being able to talk to someone who doesn't necessarily think or feel the same way that you do, that's really valuable.
Totally, yeah. Jade had an interesting question as well. How can we balance aesthetics versus green design? So I'm going to question that versus, because I think the two can go together really nicely. Because one of the things about design, at least the way I see design, is that it's creating something useful within a set of restrictions. And that set of restrictions, if we put a climate lens on that, that might be energy consumption. So how can we still get to the same level of usefulness and the same level of, meeting the user need with less? So I see it more as as an exciting restriction to work within, rather than oh no, I need to get rid of something. But yeah, and there's lots of examples out there by now. There's another ClimateAction.tech member created a directory of websites that are kind of low carbon websites, and I'll put it in the chat as well. I'll dig it up. But yeah, Shane, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you're totally right. I think it's a yes and. It's like you can have the aesthetics and it can be sustainable. It just requires a shift in the way of thinking, of not just having all of the unnecessary visuals or and again, UX is about creating the simplest user experience, and sometimes that means cutting back and making it as simple as possible. I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I see a good one. Well, they're all great questions, but Mark has one. Do design systems play a role in green design? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. This is something I've thought about a lot. I'm in the design ops field as well. I think having a design system that is foundationally a sustainable design system, using components that are, again, from like the dev green software perspective, I think it's super important. So it definitely has a place within this wider conversation. Because yeah, if you're using the right tools and components when you're designing and building, ultimately it's a great thing. What do you think, Sandra?
I actually don't have a strong opinion on this one yet, because I haven't spent enough time thinking about it. Or one of the comments on that question is that they make designing quicker, thus saving energy in the long time, and that was Mark commenting as well. The quickness of it, I think I could find ways of criticizing that, just in the sense that in the tech industry, one of those big mindset shifts that we need to create is that at the moment, everything is kind of like very deadline focused and very speed driven. So quickly iterate, quickly do this, quickly do this. But I think we need more time for actual reflection and figuring out whether something is needed. Again, going back to that kind of point. So yeah, how can we slow the tech industry down? And maybe that is through not having design systems. I don't know. Yeah, an interesting one to explore for sure.
I think we definitely don't have all the answers. I think this is like, even just being on this call and absorbing what we've talked about and some of these awesome questions, I'm gonna do a full loop and come back to the goals again. Like, what are you going to do? Like, what's the call to action now for you to actually take some of these learnings and apply it in your own role in your own life? And yeah, share it online. I would love to see what everybody's doing.
Yes.
And we'll follow the BeMore 2022 hashtag. And yeah,
And thank
thank
you
you
so
all
much
so
for
much.
joining the session.
This has been awesome.